It's a repeat of the last World Cup final, a match threatening to hand us the shock of the tournament. A real edgy game. The Springboks take on England with a place in a second successive final at stake. But before things kick off tomorrow night, me and channel co-person Will, my brother, sat down to dig into the game. And to begin, I decided to ask Will if he wanted a stat. Do you want a stat?
I want a stat. I love a stat.
South Africa's 15 this weekend, even with Andre Pollard on the bench, has more caps than any other starting 15 in international rugby history.
Really? I love how just like every now and then that record gets broken. I didn't realise this was one of those weeks.
Do you know the last time South Africa broke that?
Was that the World Cup final last time round?
No, it's the semi-final in 2015.
Okay.
Do you want to know when they broke that before that?
Go on.
The Japan game in that World Cup in 2015.
Oh, yikes.
Again, where they were enormous heavy favourites. They fielded the most experienced team in history, and they lost out of nowhere.
I'd like to thank you for reminding all the Springbok fans about that, like 1 minute in. You know, it's further proof that we both hate the Springboks.
Well, that's the thing, right? I intend to go and buy a Springbok shirt after this, so we'll see. So this weekend, South Africa once again fielded an incredibly experienced lineup against England. A repeat of the last World Cup final, or a repeat of the 2007 World Cup final, the last time the World Cup was in France. A lot of people, I think, are writing England off just because they've been rubbish. I think the other way of looking at it is England are a team that are very good at winning games.
The fact England are rubbish doesn't mean they're not going to win this game. Like,
yeah, exactly.
You can totally, I completely buy all of the criticism that England have been rubbish. But also, they have played probably as smartly as any team in this World Cup. Probably they've played smarter than any team in this World Cup. They've played a game plan that suits them better, which means that they can win despite looking like they're playing shit. When in actuality they're not. They're winning games. They deserve enormous credit for making this far. And like they are a bit of a laughing stock at the moment. People are going like, this is the worst team to ever make a semi-final or whatnot. Somebody says that every World Cup naturally. But if they win this and get into the final, people will say this team is worse than 2017 that made the final, and I'm not sure that's true.
It's not. It's categorically not.
Having 2017 was shite.
Having watched that back for the podcast earlier this year, that 2017 was utter dog shit and should have gone out in the group. They were terrible.
Oh, this current England team would put 100 points on them.
This
current
England
if you were playing like 2007 rules.
This current England team is incredibly well coached to play within their limits. I think they have got here because they're a smart team.
All credit to them.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly interesting because in some ways they've done the same thing that South Africa did when Rassie Erasmus first came in, where they have built a team around their limitations. They've built a team out of they've gone, what are we good at? It's these things. Let's build a game plan specifically where we only play to those things. And what the Boks have done since, they've built out beyond. You know, and by the time they got to that World Cup in 2019, they had the building of more of a game. They didn't have the most exciting, electrifying attack in the world, but they had Cheslin Colby, they had Mapimpi, and they had Am, and they had like the option to play more if they needed to.
Yeah,
you know, it's kind of building, and obviously that's improved since a great deal. England are working on that second bit, but they have a really, really smart team that is but exactly calibrated to their best players. And in certain positions, they've brought in other players, like Dan Cole, because they know a set piece is incredibly important to how they want to play based on that.
Like that can bail them out if they're playing badly in attack, you know, if they have a strong scrum. Like, I think Steve Borthwick, as much as he was shouting the Six Nations, like England, you know, didn't get anywhere and like pre this World Cup and so on, right? But he has clearly coached his team at an appropriate pace, you know, to say he's been brought in less than a year out from the World Cup. This is exactly how you need to coach a team, playing to the limitations of what have we struggled with? Okay, how can we eradicate that? Rather than, for instance, coming into a team, you know, 6 months out from World Cup and going, yeah, let's play total rugby. Let's play positionless rugby and just play the most ambitious and potentially probably the most world-beating style of rugby that you could possibly do. The most likely to win you a World Cup if you had 4 years to prepare a team for it, rather than 6 months.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly. It's something that Borthwick and Gatland both got right in terms of approaching the limitations. And Apshock got wrong, Eddie Jones got wrong.
Yeah.
Let's put those two in the same conversation, right? And I think a lot of this conversation needs to focus on Steve Borthwick because I think everyone's talking about him in a really alarming way. You go back just more than a year, and he was being talked of when Leicester won the Premiership as a genius on the rise, as one of the best coaches England's produced in a very long time, if not the best they've produced, coming and rising up and really building as a coach into someone who would one day coach the England team and take them on to new heights. He then got the job and didn't immediately set the world alight. And there was a lot of controversy about should England, it's things that really divides England fans is should Eddie Jones have gone or not, or should he have gone then? Should they have fired him right before the World Cup? Whatever happens. And since then, Steve Borthwick has been talked about as, well, he was the best we could do at short notice, hasn't he? Rather than the next great England coach. A year ago, people were talking about Steve Borthwick as a coach that could win England a World Cup one day.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he has learned from the best out there. He apprenticed under Eddie Jones for a long time at both Japan and England. He's done an awfully great job of building himself into a head coach. The way he went out and learned, and there's stories out there of him when he first took over and he didn't understand certain parts of the game, and he went and consulted experts and he really built himself out to be as good a head coach as possible. I think he's a phenomenal coach.
He is.
And if you look at this game, right, the direct comparison, the most important model, if you're to take it like that, of how this game's going to be played, I don't think is the 2019 World Cup final. I don't think it's the last time these two teams played in 2021, because England were just starting to build that total rugby style under Eddie Jones there, and it was a very different team. I think the really important game to compare to for this side is the Premiership final from last year between Leicester Tigers and Saracens. England at the minute are slowly building into what Leicester Tigers were. And I think this has become even more explicit because of the way Steve Borthwick's picking the team. There was a really good piece by Charlie Morgan a week or so ago about the selection experiments that Borthwick would make, but you saw this consistently when we went back and did that as a Tigers video, right? You didn't know who was playing in certain games because they changed the team regularly depending on the opposition. They would pick a team according to the tactics that they thought would work, which is why it's really surprising that Alex Mitchell was at 9 for this week, because we saw in that Premiership final a year ago, you had Jack Van Poortvliet was outstanding the entire way in, and then they had Ben Young as well as an option. He, for that Premiership final, dropped them both and brought in Richard Wigglesworth instead because he was experienced, he was the best box kicker they had available, and they knew against Saracens what they needed to do was just kick the lever off it and slowly eke it out, because Saracens had a huge pack and they had basically the entire England backline. What Leicester turned that game into was a game where mistakes decided it. Instead of being on anything else, which Leicester were capable of far more. You saw them, late on in that season, really running up high scores against the likes of Bristol, where Ashton got a hat trick. And we saw them the week before against Northampton, kind of slowly grind them down in a not dissimilar way to how England did against Fiji. We then, in the grand final, saw them turn that into a game of trying to cause errors, and whoever made the fewest errors would win. I think we're set up for the exact same thing. The strength of the Saracen side, in terms of them being a huge pack who's built out in order to have a really well-rounded backline, a far better attack, a really dynamic attack, is almost identical to South Africa. Those two are really
attack
comparable.
that translates into a kicking game as well.
Yeah.
I would argue that South Africa are more the other way around of that. They have a kicking game that won them a World Cup 4 years ago, which is then translated into, right, what if we use that to our advantage and then attack well, with people expecting us to kick all the time and sitting their wingers in the backfield and playing a shorter, forward line with the biggest pack in the world, the scariest pack in the world. And Borthwick has now been in this situation before, where he knows how to overcome that challenge. He knows how to prepare a team for that.
Borthwick is also incredibly data-driven. He basically makes his decisions. He makes tactical and personnel decisions based on statistics, right? What we're seeing with the Springboks here is they're kicking, as we talk about in the video that just went up yesterday, earlier and earlier. So they're now kicking on usually second phase rather than fourth or fifth as they were before. They're looking to kick really on the front foot, really keep momentum going. What we might see is them pushing them back in order to prevent that being the case, or really fronting up in the first two phases and putting real focus on that, potentially playing a far lighter backfield on the first couple of phases. Big part why Stewart might come in, because he can play on the wing and cover that, and he's going to be bringing him up, as well as allowing him to drop back and cover more ground. Very different prospect to Marcus Smith, allowing you to kind of really focus on those first two phases in order to slow them down. What England want to be doing is trying to get South Africa to box kick rather than kick off 10. Because when South Africa are kicking off 10 in this tournament, it's when they're really on top, and they're putting those crossfield bombs in, whether it's off Pollard or off Lebok, and they are managing to put pressure on and catch a winger out position almost every time. When they're box kicking, traditionally, it's because they're running out of steam and they want to keep the momentum up and keep moving forward down the field, right? If England can get South Africa to be primarily box kicking off 9 instead of kicking off 10, that means they've managed to shut them down to a great degree.
Here's a question for you then. So on the flip side of that, let's say, because it's often a thing that let's say England are playing and somebody keeps kicking the ball, and Freddie Stewart, being one of the best aerial fullbacks in the world at the moment, takes every single one. And they always ask on the commentary, why are they still kicking to Freddie Stewart? Because he's catching every single one. But the answer to that usually is because the team is happy to defend. They want to get upfield and they want to maybe win a turnover penalty, force an error further upfield, from making the pack run 50 metres back downfield to get behind Stewart and to run an attack from there, right? So let's say that is the case and they're kicking more off 9. Do you think that the South African D, as it is at the moment, has that in them to then back that up and win penalties in the opposition half and so on?
Well, because I think that's the interesting thing as well. We saw Wales in the warm-up game play a ploy repeatedly, and we talked about this in the worst video a little bit, where they set up kick off 9, they, the scrum are pulling it back, then they kick off 10 instead to kick the far wing. Because Freddie Stewart, he shifts about in the backfield more than any other fullback. He changes his position and where he is kind of in the pendulum more than any other fullback in the world, because he's putting himself under every single high ball. He wants to take every high ball himself. He doesn't leave anything for the rest of the back free. He tries to take everything on himself. We saw Wales shifted about, so they were shifting where it looked like they were kicking last second in order to catch him out, and they've got some real success out of targeting Joe Falconer-Singer over that. We may see South Africa look to do the same thing, and therefore kick slower ball off 10 and kind of invert that and kick faster ball off 9. So it may be actually that what I just said turns out being complete bollocks because they've gone in the complete opposite direction. What you then have, as you say, is the way that South Africa defend. And this is why an awful lot of the time South Africa send Ibenetsabev up on kick chase. And you may think it makes more sense to send, wingers and fast players up. But Ibenetsabev just comes in and just like stands over the ruck and just smashes it and just causes as much chaos as he can. And that is basically his role on kick chase. That's a huge part of his game.
The other thing is, Ibenetsabev being what, like 6'7" or whatever he is, he's like a ludicrously
20'1".
The other thing he does, and this could genuinely play a part in Freddie Stewart, who is usually completely infallible under the high ball. He just gets in the eye line of the fullback. He's not necessarily contesting the ball, but he's waving his hand in the fullback's eyes. But that was what happened with the Curtly Orense try. Literally, he just left Biel Biaré to just drop it by just getting in the way and just being a pest and getting in his eye line. You imagine that all week in training, they'll be sending Courtney Laws flying at him, getting him to catch the high ball with Courtney Laws' long, freakish arms in his way.
Yeah, all those pool noodles that Elliot Daly used to try and catch under. It leads to the situation where we've talked about England a lot, and I think because England are the big underdogs here, I think there's a lot of expectations South Africa will smash them. And if you look at the strength of those two quarterfinals, South Africa played much better than England did, where England struggled a bit against Fiji. But I also think England will go up again because I think they've got more in the tank available to them. It leaves the questions, though, on South Africa and how South Africa are preparing and how you're feeling about South Africa as a force going into this game.
Yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it? Because they have, in a sense, just to use that cliche again, played their World Cup final. They have to now back that up, and that was played in unbelievably high tempo. The ball in play is much higher than South Africa probably would have wanted it to be because they're more conditioned for lower ball in play.
Well, ball in play in the first half is almost exactly double the second half.
Yeah, exactly. So in that second half, they made all of their changes really, really early on. They gave their players loads and loads of minutes. Now, it's really interesting. So once again, they've gone for 5-3 on the bench.
Yeah.
The South African bench split is always a real talking point because now you've got Handré Pollard back in there. I think was brilliant off the bench last week. Came on really early for Marnie Libbok and managed the game. Willie Leroux, if something is going wrong, he's the right person to sort it out. Probably the two people who make the most difference are Ahir Snyman and Kwagga Smith. Kwagga Smith, I think, was one of the best players on the field last week, and he played, half an hour?
I think this is a really interesting game because the Springboks basically have to go out and beat themselves from 4 years ago. So they are playing an almost mirror image of where they were at 4 years ago. And the thing is, right, the standard has come on so far in the last few years that everyone is better than they were 4 years ago, apart from Wales. England will want a slow game. They'll want to really slow it down in the way Leicester did against Saracens, right? And South Africa have an interesting thing because they have two routes they can basically go. One is to play this game like they did against Wales in 2019. And the thing about that game, about that semi-final, about the last semi-final the Boks played in, was Wales had managed to win a Grand Slam and get to world number 1 and beat every team other than New Zealand in the world, including the Springboks twice, and the Erasmus Springboks twice, playing that exact style of play where they baited the opposition into making errors and then fed off them and ate off them. And South Africa went, right, we won't let you do that. And there's a lot of footage of Rassie and Chasing the Sun saying, this team isn't like England. They're not like Ireland. They're tough bastards. And they will wait for you to make an error. Do the Springboks play like that and play like that semi-final and just go, okay, well, we'll match you at your own game and we'll just trust that our scrum will be better, that we will wait for the penalty to come as it did in 2019. However, I wonder if because the Springboks have evolved since then, the players instead should just be incredibly bold and try and play fast against this England team and try and catch them out and not give them what they want.
They are definitely capable of that, is the thing.
Yeah.
In theory, a higher ball in play didn't suit them. But in that first half, they scored 3 tries. They were no stranger to that.
Absolutely. And that was where I think the kicking game comes in again, because they kicked when they were in their most ascendancy, when they were most in control of the game, in order to put further pressure on France.
They sit in the comfort zone, didn't they? Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that is where the Boks will change. And I think that's why they've gone for Libbok and Reinach at the halfbacks, to up the tempo in the first half and hopefully catch England out a bit and hopefully not allow them to play. Then if they need it, start the second half as happened last week, they can bring on Pollard and de Klerk at the same time as they did last week and change the pitch that England are playing. Because South Africa are capable of playing, I think, 3 or 4 different ways where England only really have one, maybe 1.5 in them.
I think that's a really interesting and important point to address. So you mentioned earlier that England have gone with Alex Mitchell at scrum half, right?
Yeah.
So I think we have a similar perspective on Alex Mitchell. Yeah. That he is at Premiership level, he's like an outstanding 9. Like if you look at the Gallagher Premiership highlights on ITV,
this is it, right? If you're tuning in to watch Flats and Ojo every Sunday night doing the Premiership roundup, then you're like, Alex Mitchell's the best 9 in England.
Oh, he's the form scrum half, you know, he deserves to be in the England team, right? But when you watch big World Cup games, you get a slightly different side to Alex Mitchell. And I don't want to shit on him too much because he is obviously a very good player. And, you know, however, all of the big games in this World Cup, he's kind of struggled. Kicked balls out on the full, he's passed balls into touch. Like, he's not grasped the game management bit as well, which is fine. It's not been that big an issue because he's had Owen Farrell and George Ford and to an extent Marcus Smith to help him out and to deal with that side of it. But it does slightly concern you because Antoine Dupont, being the best scrum half in the world, you know, one of the best scrum halves of all time, Corbus Reinach putting him under pressure was the most we've seen Dupont look human. And obviously he was exceptional last week, still Dupont, but that was the most pressure we've seen him put under. And Alex Mitchell, who is very keen to like take on snipes and take a lot on himself rather than just doing the extremely basic stuff and getting the ball out, I can't help but wonder if Reinach's going to get under his skin really early on.
This is really interesting because I mentioned that final for Leicester against Saracens. You remember who they played in the semi-final?
Was it Saints?
It was Northampton Saints, and they really went after Alex Mitchell.
Okay.
And they managed to put him under a great deal of pressure. And they also went after Dan Bigger an awful lot in order to put further pressure on Mitchell and make him do a lot of the game management.
Interesting.
And they managed to really disrupt Northampton by just managing to get to Mitchell. And the thing is, Mitchell made 2 line breaks that kind of, I think in a lot of people's eyes went, oh, he had a really good game. But like he was struggling getting kicks away. He was kind of not necessarily taking the right decisions, but he made a couple of breaks because they were really, really targeting, putting a lot of pressure on. And, you know, in that kind of way, sometimes that opens up space elsewhere. It's really interesting to see now that Borthwick has defaulted to him and has gone for him because I don't think he's the 9 they need for the way they'll probably be playing. Danny Kerr is on the bench. And the other interesting point here is that drop goal situation, right? So you pick those 3 drop goals. They have 3 completely different setups for drop goals, 3 completely different drop goal drills against Argentina, leading to those 9 points that put that game to bed. Then last week, they kicked one on the fly against Fiji to win the game. Apparently, that was Danny Kerr's call. Farrell wasn't interested in it. And then Kerr called him, get in the bloody pocket. We're knocking this over. Farrell kicks it. They win the game from there. They kick over another penalty later, but like that puts them in control of the game. Of course,
which is really interesting because that's an improvised drop goal drill.
Yeah.
That they're willing to do these on the fly, not just with setups, and that they can knock those over. And the reason why that Farrell one was successful, like, I don't mean to go into the whole that ITV bit with Johnny Wilkinson, Lawrence.
You've got to send a message to the ball.
Message to the ball. But sometimes the easiest drop goals to execute are when the defence aren't expecting it. You've set up a really good attack. It's the exact same with kicking into the backfield, you know. You've set up a really good attack, and the opposition are just thinking about, right, okay, let's play a drift defence, let's get to the wing, let's shut them down. And the next thing you know, the ball's gone through the posts. And that was what happened with Farrell's one last week.
They've got clear license to just go for drop goals constantly. There is an awful lot of different drop goal setups here. And I wonder if they've got 10, 12.
I think they'll have absolutely loads, considering they brought in Richard Wigglesworth, not necessarily as an attack coach, but as a kicking coach.
He's a kicking strategy coach, not attack
kicking strategy coach, and that involves drop goals. And also drop goals is kind of attack, because it's scoring points, you know? It's getting on the board. It all counts. It's all under the same umbrella. Look at, so in the last World Cup, New Zealand versus South Africa, Andre Pollard drops that goal. They go to the blind side where Villaru's first receiver, then they snap it back into the pocket where Pollard has gone completely unnoticed, and he gets a free shot with no pressure on him because nobody's looking at him as an attacking threat at all. I think they'll have loads of stuff like that in the book as well. Anywhere in that half. It's like a cliche when someone's got a long-range goal kicker of don't give away any penalties. But this is the inverse of that. Owen Farrell and George Ford, we've now seen, can drop goals from 50 metres plus. Okay? Anywhere inside your half, you're giving them a potential opportunity to drop a goal. You have to just fly up on any kicking option they have. They might use Daly.
This is the thing. This is why South Africa is the most difficult team for England to do this against, though, because they do that anyway.
Yeah.
They have Etzebeth and their piece of the toy are trained to just like target the 10 and put maximum pressure on. Famously, the toy on Ford in the World Cup final last time.
Yeah.
They are the most dangerous team because you are having to run extra plays in order to get those free out the game. You're wanting Vermeulen to be the guy chasing or one of the props because they're the slowest forwards they have available, right? Khaleesi will give every drop of what he's got in order to try and put pressure on you. And the other three are very, very capable of charging that down, of disrupting it, of at least throwing you off aim. Colby as well, charge down threat.
Korbisch Reinach. Do you want to know a fun fact about Korbisch Reinach?
Please.
His dad or something was quite fast in it.
Yeah, that was great. I was watching the French TV recently, and they said like Pierre très rapide. Brilliant. I know exactly what you just said. That drop goal thing is a whole subplot South Africa are watching for, and I think England. This was my gut feeling at the time watching that Argentina game. England have reached into the bag of things they want to do in the quarterfinals because they saw that game as must win. And I wonder if they reach into a bag and now everyone is aware that they're going to have 30 off goal drills they're going to pull out. And that has given South Africa a mild edge there. If this was coming out and no one knew England were looking at drop goals as the primary tactic, they just knew they dropped one on the fly against Fiji, then it's a completely different situation. But it changes the whole picture for South Africa defensively, right? Because you're not just trying to keep teams out from scoring tries. You're looking at all points and all options are on the table at all times. And this is why I don't think this game is as open shut as it should be. You should look at this and go, South Africa are a much better team and they should win this. But also I think England have so many tricks up their sleeve to try and down them. And yet South Africa are the perfect team to counter a lot of what the Borthwick way does, in the same way they were against Wales last time.
It has to be so analysis driven, not just on England, but also, as you say, Leicester Tigers. And also basically any drop goal drill that's been run by any team in the last 10 years. Like you want to be looking at basically every drop goal that's been scored in international rugby in several years and what the many possibilities are. Raz is really, really good at this, like on his analysis, especially defensively, how to get through to somebody. But I think it is very much the same way that Springboks prepare for any game. It is bully them up front, stop them from getting that platform, kick on the front foot, kick as soon as we have any sort of momentum. Eben Etzebeth is maybe the best rugby player on the planet at the moment, especially just because he's so annoying. Get him in Alex Mitchell's face, get Dutoy in Owen Farrell's face, force those two to make as many decisions and as many errors as physically possible.
This is the thing, right? So France last week tailored their entire game to denying the Springboks their strengths. England are not going to do that, I don't think. And if they do, I think it'd be daft because you're then taking out your own strengths and you're not playing to anything. I think what England are going to do instead is try and take the Springboks on and try and impose themselves over them and over the top of them and deny either team using what they're best at and try and just make the game as, I hate describing kicking rugby as negative, but as negative as possible, right? And try and make it into an error-strewn nonsense fest, the sort that Mike Tinder will desperately hate and complain about, no doubt.
Like two teams trying not to lose it, kind of. Again.
Exactly. That's the sort of way England need to play until sort of the last 10 minutes when they can change that. And again, those drop goal drills become vital. But South Africa, I think, have two approaches to this in that they can either match them and hope to do what they did against Wales in 2019. But I think that Wales team was so much better than this England team is at what they do. You know, they're playing similar styles, but Wales had won a Grand Slam doing it and a level of belief, confidence, and ability in it that this England team doesn't necessarily, even though there's some really outstanding players that have won an awful lot in here. You know, you look at the core of this England team, right? Like, it's something Gatlin said last week that almost none of his players have played knockout rugby. You know, a handful of the Ospreys players have played in that game in Saracens, and otherwise, it was just the players left over from 2019, and they lost that game, you know, in the semi-final. This England team are very different because most of them are Leicester Tigers or Saracens, and they've played big games in Europe, and especially in the Premiership. Even though it's a new team that isn't necessarily in the highest place, they're full of experienced heads who've been there and done it before, and Alex Mitchell. It's a situation South Africa need to manage really carefully. I think the decision is to go out and be bold in the first half and see if you can kind of pull away and play very fast in the way they did against France very successfully, because I don't think England can match that in the same way France did. And then perhaps second half, you slow it down, you bring Pollard on, you bring de Klerk on, and you go back to the 2019 style and try and close it out that way. But equally, I think South Africa have it in them to win it no matter what the style of rugby that's played.
Yeah, I think last week was kind of proof of that. And to an extent, even though they didn't win the game, the Ireland won.
Yeah.
Like, they so easily could have won that. People have made a lot of Marnie Libok and the points he left out on the field.
Yeah.
We saw a very different side in terms of goal kicking to Libok last week. And then you had Handré Pollard as the extra option regardless. There is a world in which some of these changes are made in the first half. But you're right, like, the Springboks can close out games. They're bloody-minded and mentally tough. Whether they're 10 points down with 20 minutes to go, or, you know, they're 1 point down in the last play, you can't write them off because they have a few murders yet to commit.
Well, I need to go and buy a Springbok shirt. Maybe get Khaleesi 6 or LaRue 15 printed on the back in time. I wonder if anyone knows anyone in Paris that would do that at very short notice. Hopefully it's not like the Welsh numbers just fall off my back instantly last week.
You need LaRue 23 on the back, mate, not 15.
Nah, I believe in him. I believe in him to start the final.
You don't believe in starters and finishers?
No, exactly. I believe in the number 15 having dominance at all times. I think this could be a really interesting,
I'm
really close
nervous
game.
for it, weirdly.
Me too. I'm excited. This is the one I'm looking forward to. My gut says South Africa, my head says South Africa, but the little bit of me that wobbles and shouts rugby all the time is like, don't write England off. That'd be daft.
Yeah,
That'd be really stupid.
And
that'd be
that's
really,
90%
really
of
silly.
both of our brains, you know.
Yeah.
I feel like we're going to get loads of comments saying that we're really anti-South African for humouring the fact that England are possibly a team that will compete and be within 100 points in this game. But I think that, you know, England could do it because England have got this far, you know, they've won all of their games so far. They're the only team left in the competition who is unbeaten so far.
Other than Portugal.
Other than Portugal,
who won all their games, and I won't hear otherwise.
Yes, that is true. And then they had to go home because they had plans last weekend, which is so unfortunate.
They just had their plans.
Yeah. But
Thomas Appleton, look, busy man, dentist.
Handsome man, yes. But point is, it looks like England haven't played that well, but they have won all of their games. They've got this far. So they can definitely do that again. And they can do it again twice. And that terrifies me.
And they've got no reason to be afraid of anyone. The last time these two teams played, England won.
Yeah.
And obviously it's a very, very different England team and pretty different South Africa team. But they've got no reason to be afraid of any team in this entire competition. They drew with the All Blacks last time. They beat Argentina last time. And they beat the Springboks last time. Like, they have no reason to be afraid of anyone left in this competition. Anyway, I'm going to go buy a Springbok shirt. You're going to go and have a lie down, probably.
Nah.
This is top banter. And we will see you soon. And do you know what we'll do when we see you soon?
What?
We'll hear a calling, a crying in the night. We'll hear a sound in the distance.
I think I know what that sound's going to be.
It'll be one word, and one word only.
Rugby.